It was an ordinary afternoon at one of the city's most elite banks, where wealth and status dictated the kind of service a person received. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow on the polished marble floors. Every detail of the grand interior screamed exclusivity, from the leather-bound ledgers resting neatly on the mahogany counters to the hushed, respectful tones of the bankers addressing their high-profile clients. The customers, dressed in tailored suits and designer dresses, moved with quiet confidence, knowing they belonged. The staff, trained to cater only to the privileged few, greeted them with bright, professional smiles. But when he walked in, everything changed. A man dressed in a simple black t-shirt, worn-out jeans, and a faded baseball cap pushed through the revolving doors. He didn't carry an expensive briefcase, nor did he sport a flashy Rolex on his wrist. His movements were unhurried, casual, completely at odds with the atmosphere of the place. Most people didn't give him a second glance, assuming he had wandered in by mistake. A few exchanged knowing smirks, already dismissing him as someone who didn't belong. Others, like the sharply dressed banker at the front desk, barely concealed their disdain. But there was one exception. An older man seated in the judge's lounge, quietly observing the scene unfold with a keen, almost knowing gaze. The young banker at the counter, Ryan, caught sight of the newcomer and scoffed under his breath. Another one of those. A nobody who had probably come to cash in the last few desperate dollars. With a smug smirk, he leaned forward and barely acknowledged the man's presence. "Sir, the line for regular customers is at the back," he said, gesturing lazily as though waving away a beggar at the door. But the man didn't move. His eyes, calm and unwavering, met Ryan's with an expression that betrayed no emotion. "I'm here to make a withdrawal," he said simply. Ryan raised an eyebrow, then chuckled. "A withdrawal?" He gave the man a slow, patronizing once-over. "Are you even sure you have an account here? Because this bank doesn't just serve anyone." The hushed conversations in the bank faded as a quiet tension settled over the room. A woman in a designer dress subtly clutched her Prada bag a little tighter. A businessman in a navy blue suit exchanged an amused glance with his wife. Even the tellers in the back whispered among themselves, some barely suppressing their smirks. The man remained calm, unaffected by the skepticism and thinly veiled mockery. Without a word, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black card. Slowly, deliberately, he placed it on the counter. Ryan picked it up carelessly, rolling his eyes as he swiped it through the system, already convinced he'd be sending this stranger on his way. He barely glanced at the screen. Until he did, the smirk vanished. The color drained from his face. His fingers, which had so confidently tossed the card around just moments ago, suddenly stiffened. His breath caught in his throat. The bank had gone completely silent. Every eye was now on Ryan. Something had changed. Something big. And in just a few minutes, this arrogant banker, who had laughed in Keanu's face, was about to experience the most humiliating moment of his entire career. But what did Ryan see on that screen? What happened next that left everyone speechless? Stay with us until the end to find out. Oh, and before we continue, tell us, where are you watching from? We love reading your comments. A heavy silence fell over the bank. Customers who had previously been whispering and exchanging smug glances now stood frozen, their curiosity turning into unease. Ryan, the once arrogant banker, had gone completely still. His fingers trembled slightly as they hovered over the keyboard. His eyes locked onto the numbers displayed on the screen. He blinked once, twice. This couldn't be real. Instinct kicked in. He checked again. Then again. He even refreshed the system, hoping, praying that there had been some kind of mistake. But no matter how many times he looked, the number remained unchanged. $322 million. His throat went dry. Ryan had seen wealthy clients before, those with 6, maybe even 7-figure balances. They were always greeted with immediate respect, ushered into private rooms, offered top-tier service without hesitation. But this was something else entirely. The weight of realization crushed him like an avalanche. For the last 10 minutes he had mocked, belittled, and dismissed a man whose wealth was beyond anything he had ever encountered. A lump formed in his throat as he struggled to find words, but none came. From the other side of the counter, Keanu remained calm, his expression unchanged. He didn't gloat, he didn't smirk, he simply watched, and somehow that was worse. Ryan wasn't the only one who had noticed. The shift in his demeanor was impossible to ignore. The well-dressed woman with the proto-bag, who had earlier clutched it as if Keanu were some kind of intruder, slowly loosened her grip, her expression now riddled with embarrassment. The businessman in the navy blue suit who had exchanged mocking glances with his wife swallowed hard, his confidence visibly shaken. Someone in the queue whispered, "What's going on?" but no one had the courage to answer. Then, from the far end of the bank, the manager stepped forward. A distinguished man in a flawlessly tailored gray suit, he had been observing the scene from a distance. But now, as he noticed Ryan's sudden change in demeanor, he knew something was very, very wrong. "Ryan," the manager called, his tone sharp. "Is there a problem?" Ryan didn't answer. His jaw clenched as he fought the urge to wipe the sweat forming at his brow. Slowly, hesitantly, he turned the screen toward his superior. The manager leaned in, his sharp eyes scanning the numbers. And then, just like Ryan, he froze. For a moment, he simply stared. His breath hitched. His carefully composed expression faltered. And in that instant, whatever superiority he held over the man standing at the counter crumbled. The manager's reaction did not go unnoticed. The customers who had been pretending not to eavesdrop were now openly invested. The smug expressions they once wore had vanished, replaced by curiosity and growing unease. Ryan, still pale, struggled to form a sentence. This has to be a mistake," he muttered under his breath. But even he didn't believe it anymore. The manager double-checked the numbers, and then triple-checked them, but the answer remained the same. It wasn't a mistake. More than anything he had ever seen, this was real. The air in the bank grew thick with tension, the kind that made even the most confident people shift uncomfortably in their seats. And then finally, the manager took a deep breath and straightened his posture. His voice, now filled with forced composure, cut through the silence. "Serve Mr. Reeves properly. Now." Ryan swallowed hard. He could feel the weight of 100 eyes on him, burning into his skin, waiting to see what he would do next. The customers who had once laughed at Keanu were now watching with a new kind of interest. Ryan turned back to face him, his arrogance completely drained. "Mr. Reeves," he stammered, his voice unsteady. Before he could say anything else, Keanu finally spoke. "So if my name was written on my cap, would I have been treated differently?" Ryan froze. The weight of those words hit like a hammer. What could he possibly say? Behind him, the manager shifted uncomfortably, already realizing that this moment was spiraling into a public relations disaster for the bank. Keanu didn't look angry. He didn't need to be. The truth had already been laid bare. Everyone in that room knew exactly what had just happened. And Ryan? He knew, without a doubt, that he would never forget this moment for the rest of his life. Because at that moment, he realized he hadn't just underestimated a customer. He had destroyed his own reputation, right in front of everyone. And there was no taking it back. Ryan stood motionless in front of the manager's polished mahogany desk, his breath shallow, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The walls of the office suddenly felt suffocating, the air thick with tension. The manager leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled together, his sharp eyes locked onto Ryan like a predator assessing its wounded prey. "For the last time," the manager said, his voice dangerously calm, "do you have any idea what you just did?" Ryan swallowed hard, but his throat felt like sandpaper. "Sir, I said you insulted one of the wealthiest clients this bank has ever had," the manager interrupted, his voice sharper now. "You mocked him, humiliated him, dismissed him, and you did it in front of customers, staff, and security cameras." He exhaled, shaking his head. "This isn't just a bad day, Ryan. This is a career-ending disaster." Ryan's stomach twisted into knots. "And if you think this stays within these walls, think again," the manager continued. "The moment Mr. Reeves walked out of here, this became bigger than you. Bigger than me. Do you realize what happens when someone like Keanu Reeves is mistreated in a public space?" Ryan didn't answer, but he didn't need to, because the answer was already unfolding. The security cameras had caught everything, the mocking, the sneers, the moment of realization. And worst of all, the look on Keanu's face when he asked that single devastating question. If my name had been written on my cap, would you have treated me differently? There was no coming back from that. The manager picked up his phone. Ryan's breath hitched. Who are you calling? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The manager didn't even look at him as he spoke into the receiver. Yes, I need the PR crisis team in my office immediately. A PR crisis team? Ryan felt the blood drain from his face. This wasn't just a reprimand. This wasn't just an internal issue. This was about to go public. Outside the bank, Keanu walked down the sidewalk, his stride calm and unhurried. The city bustled around him, pedestrians passed by. Cars honked in the distance. Life continued as usual. No one had any idea that just moments ago he had sent an entire institution into chaos. He took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. This kind of thing had happened before. People judged by appearance. They measured respect by brand names and bank balances. They treated status as a badge of worth. But today he had made sure that lesson would never be forgotten. Pausing at the corner of the street, he glanced back at the bank one last time. He could already imagine the scene inside, the hushed whispers, the frantic damage control, the realization spreading through the staff like wildfire. Things inside that bank would never be the same. And while the doors would remain open for business, the truth was clear. No one inside would ever look at a simple man the same way again. 1 month later, a different bank, the scent of freshly brewed coffee and polished wood filled the air as Keanu stepped into a different bank, one he had never visited before. The atmosphere was quiet but efficient, the soft hum of business as usual. Dressed in the same simple outfit, worn jeans, black t-shirt, and his signature cap, he made his way to the counter. A young teller, barely in his 20s, looked up from his screen and met Keanu's eyes. For a split second, there was no sign of recognition, no hesitation, no judgment. Then the teller smiled. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I help you today?" Keanu returned the smile, a small nod of acknowledgement, because that was all he had ever wanted, respect. Meanwhile, across the industry, the viral incident at the previous bank had done more than just spark conversations. It had triggered change. Other financial institutions took notice. Internal memos were sent, meetings were held, and new policies were quietly introduced across the industry. Banks began emphasizing customer-first service, anti-discrimination training, and equal treatment policies, not because they feared another viral moment, but because they now understood what was at stake. Reputation, trust, human dignity. It wasn't just about Keanu Reeves. It was about everyone who had ever been judged based on appearance alone. And as Keanu finished his transaction, tucking his card back into his wallet, he knew something had shifted. Maybe not the entire world, but enough. And that was worth more than any balance on a screen. Respect? It had cost nothing, but it had changed everything. The end.